each a totality in itself. And this is the way these men deal with their characters. It was Schopenhauer who was the first to bring Oriental terminology into Kantian thinking. Here, at the beginning of the 19th century, we have this synthesis of the two philosophies. It then became possible for writers like Mann and Joyce to take in the whole enrichment of the Oriental understanding of transcendence and the Maya aspect of personality, how it's all an illusion based on the mirror images of time and space, and render it poorly in Occidental terms. This notion of what might be called psychological or spiritual morphology informed all these works. Each is the same thing in his thinking and writing. At the same time, you have Schopenhauer opening up the whole story of the unconscious and Freud the end coming along and turning it into medical terms. This is a great moment. 39. The Hero's Journey. Foe. p. 9. Carl Fried Graf Derkheim, German psychiatrist and author. Thomas heißt Poestar. TARNAS. That reminds me of one of your favorite express-ions, being transparent to the transcendent. Campbell. A couple of years ago I learned of a great German psychologist. His name is Carl Fried Graf Derkheim and he has a center in the Black Forest, the Schwarzwald, not far from Freiburg. So I went back to Germany last September, 1981, after 52 years, that was a gamble. Andy had the pleasure of an hour with this wonderful man who is just about 85 years old now. He said the whole problem of life is to become transparent to transcendence, so that you realize that you are yourself a manifestation of this. That you live the myth. That you live the divine life within you. Yourself as a vehicle, not as the final term but as a vehicle of consciousness and life. Thesis the great theme. That I find there. Transparento transcendence. When that came into me, vocabulary it just seemed to be the only thing necessary. My definition of myth now is a metaphor transparent to transcendence. Thomas heißt Poestar. TARNAS. Could you talk about exactly what transparent to transcendence means? Campbell. Mythology opens the world so that it becomes transparent to something that is beyond speech, beyond words, in short, to what we call transcendence. If the metaphor closes in on itself ansies, I'm it. The reference is to me or to this event. The knit has closed the transcendence. It's no longer mythological. Ideas distortion. It's pathological. The energies of the universe, the energies of life, that come up in the subatomic particle displays that science shows us are operative. They come and go. Where do they come from? Where do they go? Is theory aware? The ultimate ground of being transcends definition, transcends our knowledge. When you begin to ask about ultimates you are asking about something that transcends all the categories of thought, the categories of being and non-being. True, false. These are, as Kant points out in the Critique of Pure Reason, functions of our mode of experience. And all life has to come to us through the aesthetic forms of time and space, and the logic alones of the categories of logic, so we think within that frame. 40. The road of trials. But what is beyond? Even though we're beyond Shugastsakat, a gory of thought, so transcendence is literally transcendent. Awful. Knowledge. In the Kena Upanishad, written back in the 7th century B.C., it says very clearly, that to which words and thoughts do not reach. The tongue has never soiled it with a name. That's what transcendent means. And the mythological image is always pointing toward transcendence and giving you the sense of riding on this mystery. Ondine Ikador Winningares, you are riding on that. That's the mysticism of athletics. And the mysticism of love is the riding of the two. They really are one, only they look like two. And the experience is the experience of a truth. An intuitive experience that disregards time and space. Schopenhauer has a wonderful paper he calls The Foundations of Morality. That's the one where he asks, how is it that a human being can so participate in the danger of another, that forgetting his own self-protection, he moves spontaneously to the other's rescue? How come, when the first law of nature is self-preservation, that is dispelled? His answer is that this is a metaphysical impulse that is deeper than the experience of separateness. You realize you and the other are one. And the experience of the separateness is simply a function of the way we experience in the field of time and space. Thesis the real M to which myths apply, the real M that is a fundamental reference, and it's no real at all. When the Zen masters talk about things on this level, they say, that which is and is not. That, they just say the word immediately, or the void asanyata, the void that is no void beautiful Roma, a fullness. You go past the pair of opposites. Within the field of normal life concerns we don't have to worry about those things. But when you really read the fighting point, the sharp life point, and a life crisis comes in it's major, you'd better get in that position or you won't be able to take it. My friend Heinrich Zimmer used to say the best things can't be said. This is one of them. The second best are misunderstood. That's because the second best are objects of time and space to refer to transcendence. And they are always misunderstood by being interpreted in terms of time and space. The third best, that's conversation. We're doing the third best in order to talk about the first and second best. ARRIEN. I'm thinking now of that really beautiful basque my th about the mermaid who would swim only in the lighted. 41. The Hero's Journey. Waters of the sun and gradually the sun fell in love with her. He stuck out this tongue, which was a beautiful rainbow, and pulled her up to him. And when they unified there were 7 teardrops of joy. Then Hespither back and she became a huge shooting star that grew and grew to become the moon. Now during twilight you seen either the sun or the moon because once again they're unifying. But you see all their children. Which are the stars? Campbell. That is a sweetheart, laughter. Arrien. That's transcendent. Campbell. It's a beautiful one. Where does that come from? Arrien. That's Basque. Campbell. A Basque myth? We always knew they were wonderful people. Isn't he wonderful when you hear a little myth? Like that? I've never heard it before, but you know it's mythological. You could have heard it from 3 or 4 other cultures, only you didn't. You didn't but you could have. It's talking from a certain center of the imagination and symbolization that is the mythological quality and it does not come out of intentional fiction. It comes out of some kind of metaphorical way of speaking about a beautiful life truth of some kind. Foft. Audiencequestion. You talk about being transparent to transcendence. Buddha think that the issue is that some people didn't see themselves as being transparent. They see themselves as being opaque, and that's ego inflation. And that's where they get confused and that's also the problem. Campbell. I always get a message from somebody and this is a good one. Yes, ID's lovely. I'm not quite transparent. It's the who. That is the I. The thing the Hindu teachers tell you is. You can't say Atman, the transparent self, as long as the I, that. You're referring to the phenomenal one. Then it's better to be irreverent. So you might say that Judaism and Christianity are popular religions. Their religion won the popular level for the people who are not yet ready to recognize the transcendent within themselves. 42. The road of trials. The yoke to be a little more available than they are to the opening of the door to transcendence. P9. Brown. What role does psychology play in contemporary myth? And how can I help a psychiatrist or someone who goes in for therapy? Campbell. What the psychologist is finding out about the structure of the human psyche. That is what is most relevant to mythology. Because mythology has to do with relating the psychological structure to the circumstances of objective life in the world today. It gives you a clue. It's a signal system. The images of myth are not fact, they are metaphors, and the references to transcendence. They take the facts off Lithion and relate them to psyche. This double relationship is then shown to the mystical function Derestin. What do you want to call it? The void? The fullness? The pleroma? Those are words that point past what can be conceived of, and they make the point that this whole marvelous universe that we now know of, billions of galaxies, ice on the void. No one knows where those little subatomic particles come from or go to, that flash on the screen. Live cells Sakomengon, they are spirits within the field of time and space in causal relationships. That's what we find. The mythos deal with the cosmology of the day and it's no good when it is based on a cosmology that's out of date, and that's any of 4 problems. I don't see any conflict between science and religion. Religion has to accept the science of the day and penetrate it to the mystery. The conflict is between the science of 2000 BC and the science of 2000 AD, and that's what we got in the Bible, which is based on a Sumerian mythology. Davidkennard. What happens to a nation thought this absolute in a mythology at all? Campbell. It is not a nation. It's a congeries of disparate people. No divine civilization. Kennard. Butaratherani of today's nations. Campbell. I'm not a sociologist. I don't keep up with most recent things. So I just didn't know. 43. The hero's journey. Brown. What do you see as the difference between Freud and Jung's point of view of unconscious? Campbell. When Freud learned from Jung that there was a relationship between mythology and psychology, and you get Carl Jung before the carved door of his home in Küsnacht, Switzerland. The Latin inscription carved in stone above the door is from Erasmus. Calendar not called, God's Halbathier. 44. The road of trials. This from their letters that have been published, Freud then started to study mythology from a standpoint of his psychology. The Freudian unconscious is a kind of scrap basket of repressed experiences that you can't tolerate, that you don't know how to assimilate. Consequently for him it's a function of your biography, do you see? So that your unconscious is a function of what you experienced before you even knew you were experiencing. We can't, wedenthavethesimi symbol system. The Jungian unconscious is based on a biological point of view. The energies that inform the body are the energies that inform our dreams. But these dreams are inflected your personal experiences. The Freudian unconscious, which Jung called the personal unconscious, is basically biographical, not biological. So Freud was trying to interpret the totality of mythological forms in terms of a historical crisis in the past. That's patricide, you know, in totem and taboo. In other words, she interprets the symbology in terms of historical and biographical events. Jung sees that, yes, that's one aspect of the psyche, but the other aspect is the energies of the organs which are the same in all. Ophus, Movingus. That's what he scaled the collective unconscious. That's unconscious that each of us shares. Mythic symbols come out of that depth, not out of the personal depth at all. Every mythology is, of course, oriented to a historical situation. It comes out of this people, this province, and that one and the other. And so there is that local inflection. But what disinflected are the deep energies of the totalid? Less than B.C. Campbell. Adolf Bastian, a German anthropologist, has meant a great deal to me with just this main idea. Headed around 1925, these common themes that come out of the collective unconscious he calls elementary ideas. But he always come to expression in specific social environments and it's historically and geographically differentiated. Hesselit those differentiations elementargedenken, or ethnic core folk ideas. When you are in your youth the folk idea guides you into the society you are inducted into for life. But here comes a time when life dismisses you and then the 45. The hero's journey. Folkidon shells, you might say, the elementary idea, which guides you back. In India, in art criticism, the sesame two aspects of images are recognized. The fork aspect, which simply has to do with POPLE and things in stories in time and space as Kalidesi, which means local, popular. On the other hand the elementary ideas, when the deity is represented, are called marga, the path. Margus, from a rude word, mrg, which refers to the footprints left by an animal, and you follow that animal. The animal that you are trying to follow is your own spiritual self. And the path is indicated in the mythological images. Follow the tracks of the animal and you will be led to the animal's home. Who is the animal? The animal is the human spirit. Where is its home? It's in your own heart. So, following the elementary idea, you are led to your own deepest spiritual source. Sadhadisi, the folk, guide you into life, and Marga, the elementary, guide you to your own inward life. Mythology serves those two purposes that way. The elementarities do not change. Where do they come from? They come from the soul. The origines the soul of man. Marga, the problem is not to lose touch with them. And when the folk at East had relatato iserta in social order and structure are no longer functioning for that structure because another structure has come along, we are in psychological disarray. This is one of the problems today. These days the social system and the social ideal sandalso the physical environment are changing so fast that there is no opportunity for a constellation, for a crystallization, to develop. Justin, my own lifetime the transformations in terms of ethics and how people are expected to behave, well, it's prodigious. Foe. Campbell. One afternoon when I was Avery little boy. Down here on 98th Street and Riverside Drive, in New York City. My uncle came in and said, Joe, we're going down to Riverside Drive to see a man fly an aeroplane from Albany to the Battery. 46. The Road of Trials. And this was the longest flight ever. It was Glenn Curtis flying a sort of flying bicycle down the Hudson River. I remember standing along the street with all the people standing on buildings watching this thing happen. As the sun went down it was twilight and then we saw this thing coming, and everybody shouted, there he's. There he's. That was when I was a little boy and then the year I left Columbia to go to study in France and Germany, 1927, was the year Lindbergh flew across the water in that little thing, the Spirit OFST. Lewis. You should see it in the street, Lewis Airport. And now they are on the moon. My God. Just in terms of mechanics it's a terrific job, not only the actual act but the notion of consciousness, the notion of my relation to the universes. Transformed by this. So we're in the middle of a big change. Foe. Campbell. I had the real pleasure, many years ago, 1954, of having an invitation to Totea, my wife and I, with Dr. and Mrs. Jung, and this was at his place outside Zurich called Bollingen, after which the Bollingen Foundation was named. It's at the far end of Lake Zurich, so we stopped at a lovely little hotel and viewed that part of the area, and when it came time to go to Jung, we got in our car and drove down the road looking for Bollingen. I had driven a couple of miles when we asked one of the peasants at the side of the road, bit, wo ist Bollingen? Bollingen ist there and lang. Botchki go this way and I see another chap and then he say, bit, wo ist Bollingen? Bollingen ist there and lang. So this is the way I finally came to the place where it was and it was a little road that ran off. We turned across that road and across the railroad tracks. Now the Swiss trains are silent and fast. And when we crossed the track, poof, behind us went the train. I said to Jean, we've gone through the simple gates. We've gone through the Klapfelsen. We're in the Holy Land now. And Jungas ked himself by what mythology why he was living and found he didn't. No, and so he said, I made it the task of tasks of my life to find by what mythology I was living. Joseph Campbell, Esselin.1982. 47. The Hero's Journey. We drove up to the place where Jin's little castle was that he had built with his own hands, this stone castle that was part of Hyso Pusto find what his mythology was. We drew up there and got out of the car and began walking up the path, but so many people had walked there that the path was worn too deep to reach the door. I didn't know how to get in. Well, Gino shouted to things, so finally she found the bell and rang it, and we come in and were greeted by Dr. and Mrs. Jung. We had tether, and now this is the man character. No, Herr Doktor Professor. He was just a genial host. I had no trouble with him because by that time I had published 4 volumes of Heinrich Zimmer's work. Zimmer was a friend of his, and Jung had published one of Zimmer's German works. So were Katie tours, you might say, of Heinrich Zimmer. Now I was about to leave for India and so Jung said, well, you're about to go to India. Let me tell you about the meaning of the syllable OM. I thought, well, he said, when I was in Africa group of US went for a walk and we got lost. Pretty soon we realized that there was group of young warriors around us, standing on one leg, holding spears, with things through their noses. We didn't know who they were. They didn't know how we were. Nobody could speak anybody else's language. And, Jung said, after a rather embarrassing and troublesome moment, we all sat down. We looked at each other and when we all felt comfortable that everything was alright, what do I hear? I hear OM. Om. Then, he said, 2 years later I was in India with a group of scientists, and if there is any group of people that is not susceptible to the experience of AWE, this is it. We went up to Darjeeling and went to Tiger Hill. To get there you have to leave early in the morning, before dawn, and are transported up the hill. You don't know what you are gonna see. It's dark. Then the sun comes up and infinitudes of snow-capped Himalayan peaks burst into rainbow colors. And what did I hear from the scientists? Om. Then Jung said, almost the sound nature makes when it's in harmony with itself. I thought, that was alright. And so I went away to India. Jung was a beautiful man to be with. That's all he can say. 48. The Road of Trials. ARRIEN. You speak of the mythology of youth as the mythology of moving into the world. Booty in your eye if you chose something that you wouldn't have chose not to get her T5. Do you go back and choose that? Do you stick with your original decision? Or move to the inward journey? Campbell. Is there any single rule, laughter, that would work for everybody? If 3 wash it would be so easy to answer that question. The point is that every individual has some very special problem in this midlife or late life crisis about what he has been doing. How deeply has it really involved him? Has he had other outside marginal interests of any kind whatsoever? What were he? All the seer every special problems. Now there's some moment in Jung's life when he had finished his work on his first great book, the book that Freud would not accept, Symbols and Transformation. This had to do with the imagery of a woman who was in deep psychosis. He began recognizing the analogs between her hallucinations and basic world mythologic imagery. And Jung said when he finished work on the book he realized what it meant to live with a mythology and what it meant to live without one. And he asked himself by what mythology he was living on found he didn't know. And so he said, I made it the task of tasks of my life to find by what mythology I was living. How did he do? He went back to think about what it was that most engaged him in fascinated play when he was a little boy. Saw that the hours while pass and pass. Now if you can find that point you can find an initial point for your own reconstruction. Go back and find what was the real fascination. So Jung went back to boyhood and found the love to play with stones, making little villages. Then Huantan bought himself a piece of property and began, with his own hands, building that amusing little castle that they had there in Bollingen on Lake Zurich. No Echone is to work it out in his own way. But if a person just refuses to think to the Hassan inside problem, he's not going to work the thing out. Nobody can what for him. You have to learn how to recognize your own depths. 49. It's not the agony of the quest, it's therapy. Toure of the Revelation. Joseph Campbell. Professor Campbell teaching at Sarah Lawrence in the 1960s. What it was the hero with 1,000 faces. What it is, I asked my first lecture to my students at Sarah Lawrence. And 2 pounds. Less than P caret, Q greater than. 77 Z Vision Quest. 2 weeks after Campbell returned to New York, in October 1929, came the Wall Street crash. Unable to find a job, and unwilling to pursue the PhD program at Columbia, Joseph Campbell retired at the age of 25 to friend's cabin in Woodstock, New York, with his sister, Alice, a student of the Russian sculptor Alexander Archipenko, to read and to try his hand at writing fiction. For the next couple of years, the callow young author, Ash described himself, read voluminously and wrote unsuccessfully. Finally, in 1931 he traveled in the family Model A Ford to California to look for a job. Through the young nutritionist Adele Davis, he met John Steinbeck and the biologist Ed Ricketts, who rekindled his interest in the relationship between mythology and biology. He sailed with Ricketts up the west coast to Alaska on the Inside Passage, where they collected intertidal fauna and Camp Bell played the balalaika with Russian gold miners. In 1933, he accepted a teaching job from his old master at Canterbury Prep School, but resigned at the end of the term and went back on the Depression. Serendipitously one of his short stories sold, and a long-lost piece called Strictly Platonic. On the $300 windfall he earned from the story here turned to Woodstock for 2 more years of self-imposed exile, studying in depth the authors who had galvanized him in Europe: Joyce, Spengler, Mann, Freud, Jung, Fraser, and Frobenius. In spring of 1934 came a job offer from Sarah Lawrence College, which I immediately accepted. There, for the next 38 years, he taught mostly popular classes in comparative literature and mythology. 51. And tilde greater than. Campbell. I think the most important period of my scholarship and study followed my return from Europe. Carrot came back to the United States about 2 weekends before the Wall Street crash. Anthe wasn't a job in the world. I went back up to Columbia to go on with my work on the PhD. And told them, this whole thing has opened it out. Oh, no, they said. You don't follow that. You stay where you were before you went to Europe. Well, I just said, to hell with it. My father had lost all his money but I had saved so me's a student. I used to play in a jazz band and so I piled up money during a few years. And on that, you might say, I just retired to the woods. I went up to Woodstock and just read and read for 5 years. No job, no money. I learned then that you don't need money to live or a man who didn't get himself involved sooner than he should have, before he had the ability to support what his involvement might be. So during the years of the Depression I had arranged a schedule for myself. When you didn't have a job or anyone total, you what toto, you could fix one for yourself. I divided the day into 4 4-hour periods, of which I would be reading in 3 of the 4-hour periods and free one of them. By getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning, by 9 I could sit down to read. That meant I used the first hour to prepare my own breakfast and take care of the house and put things together in whatever shack I happened to be living in at the time. Then 3 hours of that first 4-hour period went to reading. The end came an hour break for lunch and another 3-hour unit. And then comes the optional next section. It should normally be 3 hours of reading and then an hour out for dinner and then 3 hours free and we're getting to bed so I'm in bed by 12. On the other hand, if I were invited out for cocktails or something like that, then he would put the work hour in the evening and the play hour in the afternoon. 52. The Vision Quest. It worked very well. I would get 9 hours of sheer reading a day. And this went on for 5 years straight. You get a lot done in that time. When the job at Sarah Lawrence came, until I started writing, I continued that schedule over the weekends when I was at home. Reading what you want and having one book lead to the next is the way I found my discipline. I've suggested this to many of my students. When you find a writer who is saying something to you, read everything that writer has written and you will get more education and depth of understanding out of that than reading his scrap here and his scrap there and elsewhere. Then go to people who influenced that writer or those who were related to him, and your world builds together in an organic way that is really marvelous. Whereas the way these things are taught normally in college and school is a sampler of what this one wrote and that one wrote and you're act to be more interested in the date of the publication of Keats sonnets than what's in them. And so with those women students at Sarah Lawrence to help me, I broke completely away from the academic approach to these subjects. It was so grand experience. I was a little nervous at times. I remember having a $1 bill in the top drawer and knowing I would not die as long as that dollar bill was there. And so various things turned up. I spent the year before I got the job teaching at Sarah Lawrence minding a dog for some people who had built a house at Woodstock, a beautiful little house. It was a great big dog, a kind of a cross between Appalachia and a Berman Pinscher, whose name was Fritz. I spent a year with this animal and I learned a dallet about dogs. Heavily in love with the cat. Down the road and I tried to condition his reflexings so thought they wouldn't go down to the cat and, of course, he found ways to get down the air. That was one way of living life on no money. TARNAS. I'd like to hear about the advantages of note of Inga PhD, laughter. 53. The Hero's Journey. Campbell. Well, it's not an advantage to be without a PhD. Buddhist is an advantage not to have taken of because of the things that they do to you to get you into the slot that they want you in. Just at the time of your life when the stars are opening and your Mindy's opening to new thoughts, new things, they put you under the supervision of some professor who had his excitement. I fever had it, a lifetime ago. No, he's interested principally in the footnotes that you are handling. You know, ID's dreadful. And so I have a theory that, yes, PhDs are all right in certain areas, but in the areas of the liberal arts, of culture, it's a sign of incompetence to have a PhD, laughter. I mean it. The time when you should have been finding your thoughts, should have been opening up and being excited at the stuff is exactly the time they bring the axe down on you. I can remember a wonderful professor at Columbia named Raymond Weaver. He's the who rediscovered Andre Ville back in the 20s. On to had no PhD. When I decided I was going to go on to graduate work he said, well, be careful because they're gonna flatten you out. And while I was working on it, an invitation came to accept the teaching position out in the Middle West. When I spoke to him, he said, if that doesn't flatten you out, a job like that will. And those remain in my minds very important clues for a learner from a marvelously civilized man. Foe. Campbell. So I quit that because they didn't want to hear about Sanskrit, they didn't want to hear about modern art, they wanted to hear about the relation of Celtic myth to Arthurian romance. And he got over that. I remember thought he just didn't have anybody to tell me what to read and so I began pulling these things together. Theorization. I discovered during those years, Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West, and the marvelous work of Leo Frobenius, seeing these men talking about historical forms, and seeing how it all went together with Jung and Freud and Mann and Joyce. Then he discovered Robinson Jeffers out there in California. Thus a very great 54. The Vision Quest. Sarah Lawrence College in the 1960s. I had been founded as a women's college with the idea that women did not need or really want, nor were they properly served by, a spin on the male curriculum on the model of a male college. Illuminations. Andy didn't have to write a thesis. I didn't have to write anything. Ali did was underline sentences and take notes. It's funny, I spent about 40 years taking notes. I have 14 file drawers packed full of notes, and he never bother with them now anymore. Tething comes in that way. So when you didn't have a job and you were doing your own reading, you've got deep psychological questions. Asked he past those of a little boy. And he thought, I don't want a job. So an invitation came from Sarah Lawrence to see if I wanted a job, and when I saw all the pretty girls I said, yes, I want a job. Then a funny thing happened when I got the job, namely, all my psychological problems disappeared. 55. The Hero's Journey. Brown. Did you have some sense that you're headed for a job as a teacher? Campbell. What happened with my mind was that I was enjoying so much just reading and doing what I wanted, without any goal out ahead other than that to which my reading was to king me. It was all the stuff that's found in Europe that was beginning to come together in the way that I can see it now. I didn't think he wanted a job or anything of the kind. And then came that one day, when in the mailbox was this little letter from Sarah Lawrence, inviting me down for a job. One of my professors at Columbia, W. Lawrence, from 3 years before, had recommended me as someone who would possibly be okay for this, since I hadn't ever earned any money in my life. When I was asked, Mr. Campbell, what kind of salary do you want? I said, oh, I don't know. How about $1,000? And Constance Warren, the president of the college, said, we don't pay that little. Sudhi pay met $1,200. When I hear what people starting now, just falling out of the cradle, I can see had those were interesting times. The wonderful thing about Sarah Lawrence, and the reason Sony really took the job, was that the college had been founded only a few years before for young women. The college had just started, so I didn't the veto fiat wallet. You know, teach T Sand, you're gonna teach that too. I had been founded as a women's a perfectly marvelous faculty was assembled. You of Edo have men and women of considerable sophistication to follow. Students lead into be able to carry that person into the main stream of the humani ties out of his or her own impulse. That we did. Joseph Campbell. Professor Campbell, second from right, ATA faculty meeting in the 1950s. 56. The Vision Quest. College with the idea that women did not need or really want, nor were they properly served by, a spin-off on the male curriculum on the model of a male college. Soth to was that we shall follow the interests of the students. Now that was a very interesting time. There was a big resource pool of academic people out of work. There were people coming over from Central Europe, with Hitler over there, and so a perfectly marvelous faculty was assembled. It really was. You have to have men and women of considerable sophistication to follow students lead and to be able to curve that person into the mainstream of the humanities out of his or her own impulse. That we did. Very so on the creative arts faculties built up. In those years, in the men's universities, if you wanted to study art, you studied the history of art. Here we had studios. And the dance. Martha Graham teaching the dance at Sarah Lawrence. I mean, this is what we had, a marvelous, marvelous school. To move in there and be able to give the courses that dealt with materials that had meant something to me during my 5 years of reading and know that they would meet the needs of other young people was a real privilege, really great. So I took the job and was there for 38 years. It kept getting to be more and more instructive to me. I had to cut it down to only seniors so that I wouldn't have to make a selection because I could teach only a certain number of people. Whenever had mass classes, I had to have interviews with every one of my students every fortnight and second to teach more than 20 people. I could see how it enriched their understanding of the work they were doing. ASA male studying mythology, I had certain interests of my own. But at that college not only did we follow the interests of the students, we found out what the interests were. In the half to 3/4 hour conference with every one of my students, I came to know personally what they were getting and what they wanted. I was forced by my female students to consider the mate real from the point of view of the woman. And that point of view had to do with what does the materia mean to life? What does it mean to 'em? I don't care why this mythic are there and then over there, but not over here. What does it mean to 'em? When I was teaching, I would say I had almost a 50-50 split between Christians and Jews and now and then Buddhists. 57. The Hero's Journey. Professor Campbell teaching a class of rap students, 1950s. I was forced by my female students to consider the material from the point of view of the woman. And that point of view had to do with what does the materia mean to life? What does it mean to 'em? Zoroastrians and people of other kinds. And my first thought was that I am gonna relieve them of their religion. Booty found very soon that the result was exactly the opposite. That suddenly these religions, which had been presented to them as God is out there, had new messages. And I have known and met those students since. This started 40 years ago, and they're all mothers of children now. They tell time and time again what the value of this thing opening out is. You don't lose your religion. You stay with what you've got, but certainly it can talk what I would say would be its Original language before the clergy closed it off. In my thinking about the determination of the direction of my own thought, I have to give the credit to my students. What they did was in the way of keeping me on a beam that was a beam of the vitality of the subject. I think it's a shame what is happening now with the code movement. This differentiation, which is so important to human. 58. The vision quest. Life. The difference between a male and female is being wiped out. All differentiations are being wiped out. You're almost no talo toven have a club now. Anything like a differentiation is called elitism, and yet he's not enjoyed. Butha Ving got my 5 years of doing my own reading, and then 38 years of supplying young women with the vitality of the subject that I had found for myself. It was marvelous. ARRIEN. When I think about how much you learned about women after all those years of teaching. Campbell. I taught them for 38 years and I still wouldn't want to say that he knew what they're all about. ARRIEN. Not many people can say that they'd have all women for 38 years. How many on this planet, in this culture, can say that? Campbell. I learned more than I taught. But it wasn't about women. ARRIEN. What was it about? Campbell. It was Sabu teaching. Their attitude was very different than mine. And if my work's area round and regarded as helpful and important, it's because of those young women. I know it. Now that was a great privilege. Brown. Did you have to deal with projection from the students? Campbell. I knew what the projections were, so that I knew it had nothing to do with me or them. It was just something going on. So I always called the students by their last name until I began to think of myself as a grandfather. Then he could begin to call them by their first names. The thing was to keep a good cool front. Now with a girl like Marilyn Monroe, the beauty is a kind off-screen in front and they feel nobody is getting through to them. I had about 4 students like that, and when they came into the room he had to go to work just to talk to them properly. And you. 59. The hero's journey. Know that you're just in the presence of something that is almost divine. And that's no good to you as a teacher, that's a curse. It's fascinating. Brown. Joe. I know one of your students who is in her 40s now who's where she's never loved Danny Mon as much as you. Evan thought she's been married 3 times. Campbell. Well now, that's sweet of her. Brown. Each time Tovriatic women shettles me. But always working in the background is Joe Campbell. What do you think about that? Campbell. That theory outside of teaching women comes from the fact that they did not let me, in teaching this subject of mythology, get a finto all kinds of academic corners. They always wanted the material to relate to themselves, to life. And he attribute the popular aspect of my writing to that training I got from these students. They were wonderful. Brown. How could you measure they were getting the message? Campbell. My friend Heinrich Zimmer used to say that the radio station WOB, Wisdom of the Buddha, is broadcasting all the time. But you've got to have your receiving set, and until you have the receiving set, well, you're not getting the message. You can't teach Buddhism, you can't teach illumination. You can give different clues to how to get it. But if a person isn't willing to paddle his own canoe is not gonna get across the river. Some people are just unable to experience the radiance, but they John listen to lecture. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said if an American was given a chance to choose between going to heaven and hearing a lecture about it, he'd go to the lecture. And Swaff. You're not able to experience heaven, you can take a lecture about it, and maybe that will save you. They say you can liata girl Tovasar but you can't make her think. They didn't say that about Sarah Lawrence. Less than BC. JAMAKEHIGHWATER. Somewhere in your work human. T on the fact that you thought that very early on humankind was 60. The vision quest. Actually in a perpetual dream state. What I'm wondering about is if this dream state, this art world which we all, I think, have such enormous regard for, has not in some way been dismissed as secondary, and that what your work really does is to bring us back to the fact that this is not secondary, that this is primary. Thesis. What it is to be alive. And isn't that what finally makes the Iliad and the Odyssey viable and important to us today? The symbols might be different and the images may be different, but that which motivates those epics is still within us. Campbell. That whole problem of breaking out of the field of waking consciousness into a field of dream consciousness is a basic problem of ritual. I would say the main function of rites is to orient an individual to the dream consciousness level, which is the productive level, the second level area on AUM, as it is interpreted in one of the Upanishads. Dream consciousness is furtherin, and yet is a curative consciousness, whereas waking consciousness is a critical consciousness. It's a totally different logic. In the dream Suareth dream, the most primitive people of the world, and they are almost extinct now, are the Bushmen of South Africa, who are hunters on the plains. The Pygmies are really gatherers mainly in the jungle. They spend their nights in dances and the mendants and the women simply sit in the center and clap and guide them a little bit. But them and are going round and round in a very stiff manner with the expectation that they will flip out and go into a trance state. Among the sea people there are always those who undergo a psychological crack-up, what's known as Theshamon crisis, where the person goes down into the unconscious. Between the complete flipping out and the moment of loss of balance they are in a position to cure. And then they go into this state. Now we have descriptions that have been given by some of these men of what they experience in the trance state. And it is a whole mythology, climbing the sky on those strands that the sun sometimes sends down, spider webs and things like this, and of who they meet up there. It's a whole mythology that comes right out of an inward experience and then becomes the mythology of the people. Note everyone into these trances but get the news of what's inside themselves from this one so to go into trances. And then you have the shamanic experience of the north. Therefore, in some, the monstrous, irrational, and natural motifs in folktale and mythare derived from the reservoirs of dream and vision. On the dream level, such images represent the total state of the individual dreaming psi, che. But clarified off personal distortions and profounded by poets, prophets, and visionaries, they become symbolic of the spiritual norm for man, the microcosm. They are those phrases from Animage Langage, expressive of metaphysical, psychological, and sociological truth. Joseph Campbell, Commentary to the Complete Grimm's Fairy Tales. 61. The Hero's Journey. The Flyer. Watercolor by John White, from Virginia Series, England. Circa 1585 to 1590. Siberian Tungus Shaman. Engraving by Nicholas Wilson, Holland, 1705. ERN Peoples, the Siberians, and down in South America. And what it's associated with in the North and America says the song. Every shaman has his song that Takashima way. There have been descriptions of how a person first hears his or her song, walking along a seashore or being in a forest. There is this experience in from an once overtaken. There's an interesting paper, The Shaman from Elko, in the Festschrift novel volume for Joseph Henderson, a psychiatrist in San Francisco. It's an account of a woman in West Virginia in the coal mining era there, who in her late 60s had the dreadful feeling that she had lost life, that she had never lived life, that there had been a life for her that she had not lived. And in the analysis they found one time when she was a little girl, about 13 years old, that's about the time for the experience, she was walking in the forest and she heard a strange music, a strange song. But she didn't have in her culture the assistance to help her do something with that, and so she lost it. And then through other life she had the feeling that she hadn't lived their life. The thing about the shaman crisis is that if the individual does not follow the song will die. He will really die. This is a strange psychological thing. 62. The Vision Quest. STANISLAVGROF. In the society many of the states the shamans go through would be labeled as psychotic. The career many shamans start by the powerful experience of unusual states of consciousness with the sense of going into the underworld, being attacked, dismembered, and hen being put back together, and ascending to the supernal realm. If you look at these experiences and give them psychopathological labels, those in our culture undergoing a shamanic transformation wouldn't typically be allowed to complete it. High water. How would we apply that kind of knowledge, which is so remote from this moment, in this dominant society? How would we apply it to life as we live it today? Campbell. I think the thing in our own experience is the person who in youth has the sense of a life to live, and then daddy says, no, you'd better study law. Because there is money in law. No, I mean it. I think this is exactly the counterpart. And you meet those people later on, and they are the ones who have climbed to the top of the ladder and found it's against the wrong wall. They have not lived their lives. High water. My people say it in a different way, but which is exactly the same. They say, do not be afraid of what you're becoming. Campbell. That's right. BETTEANDRESEN. You talk about the decision to follow your bliss or your song during the crisis of youth. How about somebody who didn't have this courage at that time? Is that perhaps a midlife crisis? And is it too late if you miss the boat at 35? Campbell. According to the gospel site, is never too late for salvation. That was a nice question, Shapadom. ARRIEN. It was. And not only was it a nice question that she put to you, it's going to reach a lot of people who have this same crisis. Campbell. Exactly. 63. The Hero's Journey. Andreessen. I know so many people who are in the same boat I was in a few years back. They need the validation that says follow your bliss. Booty can remember being told in Sunday school that if Rhoda and Ragan are suffering, then you're on the right track. Campbell. That's the wrong one. Andreessen. It was the wrong one, and, I mean, it was painful. Campbell. I got this from the Sanskrit idea, thattran. Sentence is transcendent. Now there are three words that come. Closetwa. Sat Chit Ananda. Thatis. Satis being, Chidi's consciousness, Anande bliss. Sonande the only thing you can be aware of. Follow it and it'll be alright. The probability is that when you follow it everything will work out, even if you think it won't. Andreessen. I understand that more and more because as I do that, as you say, doors that were never there open. Campbell. It really works. They open. Andreessen. So is the midlife crisis which a lot of people are experiencing in the early 30s or maybe mid-30s, is it that they are finally realizing that the ladder was up against the wrong wall? That perhaps this is the last chance? Campbell. I would think that likely, but the midlife crisis, like any other late life crisis, is that of unshelling a system of life and immediately moving into a new system of life. Because if this life essential and you don't have a new intention, there is a total disorientation. This, I think, is the big problem in retirement. And it's going to be more of a problem now that retirement being made earlier and earlier and earlier. The life in which you have involved yourself fully has suddenly been moved. And so what? I'm told that the life expectancy of a blue-collar worker after retirement is around 5 years. That means that this body says, you've got nothing for me Toto, so let's say goodbye. Following your bliss just seems to be the clue to believing what might be called the mythologically inspired life. I've had the experience of teaching young women for many years, and occasionally you would see someone wake up right there in front of you. A wonderful moment in a pedagogical experience. And then you meet the person 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later at the alumni reunions, and you can see the difference between the woman who had been able to follow her 64. The Vision Quest star and the woman who had married into an archetype marriage situation, where now's high's the wife of the family and doing all the chores that have nothing to do with what she originally intended for her life. You can see it when you meet them, the vitality that's in them. Thoughts of our fortunate not to be artists and move into a field that is always evoking the life of the imagination are the ones who have the easiest time, I guess, but that's not the only way to live your life of bliss. ARRIEN. That is so important. Many people don't follow their song through those different transitions. They want to follow the song and yet very socially pressured by their conditioning. Campbell. Social pressurized the enemy. I've seen it that pen. How in heaven's name are you gonna bend your own track if you are always doing what society tells you to do? I also spent a year teaching in a boys prep school and that was a crowd that was trying to make up their minds, you know? I've isn't them since. And those who followed their zeal, their bliss, they have led decent, wonderful lives. Those who did what dad said they should do because it's safe found out yet he's not safe. ID's disaster. Campbell. The image that comes to me mind is a boxing ring. There are times when you just want that bell to ring, but you're again who's losing. The one who's winning doesn't have that feeling. Do you have the energy and strength to face life? Life can ask more of you than you're willing to give. And then you say, life is something that should not have been. I'm not going to play the game. I'm going to meditate. I'm gonna call out. There are 3 positions possible. Oh nice up to it, and facing the game and playing through. The second is saying, absolutely not. I don't want to stay in this dogfight. That's the absolute out. The third position is one that says, this is mixed of good and evil. I'm on the side of the good. I accept the world with corrections. And may this be the way I like it. And it's good for me and my friends. There are only the 3 positions. I remember, as a kid, seeing a caterpillar into which an ignuman waste fat light its eggs and the egg had hatched, and 65. The hero's journey. This poor caterpillar was being consumed from inside by maggots while it was still alive. Yes, that's the way it is. There's something rather, what John Isay, exhilarating about putting yourself on the side life, instead of on the side of protective ideas. When all of this protective ideas about life that you've been holding on to break down, you realize what a horrific thing it is, and you are it. This is the rapture of the Greek tragedy. This is what Aristotle called catharsis. Catharsis is a spiritual term, and it is elimination of the ego perspective, wiping out go system, wiping out rational structuring, smashing it, and letting life boom come through. The Dionysian thing smashes the whole business. And so you are purged off your ego judgment system be which you're living all the time. Now new notions of consciousness are beginning to come in with this holographic paradigm idea. We are all inner consciousness, one. And we're one with a totality and potentially omniscient. But the brain brings us to focus here, so that we can live in this particular time and space. The brain is a constrictor. It contracts our knowledge. We know all these facts to help us here. Then what happens when the brain is blown? Let's say with LSD or something like that, wow. And you may never get your brain back. We've been alive in terms of the hair and out the affirmation of this particular focus, but with the knowledge of the other foci, other possibilities, and the whole totality range, in order to work as artists in the sense of Manon, Joyce and Clay and Picasso. You're in a field of deep problems. Why should the seamen have given their whole lives to working on problems like this if they weren't of life-shattering depth? This is the problem of the relationship of art to life. A seed to killer or fosterer of life? It's a fosterer. Less than BC pound. Campbell. The communist thing in Tibet is a pretty nice thing to think about. I have a Tibetan friend, Rado Kyongla Nawang. 66. The Vision Quest. Losang, and he spent 3 years helping him write his autobiography. He was in Lhasa when the communists invited the Dalai Lama to come to a theatrical production in their camp and leave his bodyguard outside. The Dalai Lama had just passed what we would call his doctoral exam, Hailharampa exam, and this friend of mine was one of the examiners. The Dalai Lama was living in the summer palace, the Nabalinka, about an hour and a half or so outside of Lhasa. So was invited to go to the communist camp. The whole population of Lhasa came out between the Nabalinka and the Communist camp so that the Kanathavagona wanted. 2. Meanwhile is starting to escape. And the communists the end bombarded the Nabalinka and started the whole crackdown. In 1959, machine gunning people fleeing from the country and all. That kind of thing. We don't think of that when we think of the power of things. We don't think of that when we think of the power of the will, and so read Lao Tzu. We still read the Tao Te Ching. Even though Mao Zedong read those things too. Sotherwhere, there is this power. Now, in all my years of working with this Tibetan whose monastery wa swiped out, his teachers tortured to death. I mean the torture system was terrific. I haven't heard him say one negative word about the Chinese or about what happened. This was Buddha consciousness, Buddha. Process. Ithirtis, it hurt them, but life hurts. You don't say, no, to life. Now that's big stuff, and this taught me what religion is. I never heard any negative on his part, and I've known I am now for 7 or 8 years. It is from Losang that I have learned my deepest lesson, Kumwandove's feet, of what a life inspired. By the teaching of the Buddhamians. Joseph Campbell, forward to my life and lives. AUDIENCEQUESTION. Is theory danger that, if you accept violence, you could identify with the destroyer and not with the victim? Campbell. No, you have to identify with both. Say you're in the studio, painting a picture. You're at your desk writing a book. You get out, you walk on the street, and you see somebody. 67. The hero's journey. Holding up somebody else, and you get into a fight. This is one of the problems, the difference between the position as artist and the position as personal life. The metaphor I have in Mindy's a tennis game. If there's going to be tennis game, you've got to one side of the net, and you've got to play hard and try to beat that person, or there's no game. But the referee doesn't care. And you shouldn't either. In your other aspect. Thesis, what's known as good sportsmanship. You're trying town, but suppose you lose? There's an Eskimo saying, toe in a dog sled race, that's great. Tolos, that's alright too. There's the sense of the game. And then life is a game, you're the winner or the loser. And if you lose, you think of that winner, he's a bad man. If you won, oh, how great am I? It's too funny, it's too silly. We talk about the Nazis, and then we drop 2 atom bombs, one of them completely superfluous, the one on Nagasaki. Groff. I would like to bring in material from a somewhat different area. I am a psychiatrist and have been interested in unusual states of consciousness. In psychedelics, for example, you see that people have a lot of geometric visions, a lot of abstract visions, which can be very simple, or spirals, or phosphenes. But they also have some rather complex images that some people compare to arabesques, to elements in Muslim mosques or Gothic cathedrals. If the process deepens further, they start experiencing elements of the birth process, confronting death, powerful death-reversing sequences of the kind Joseph mentioned, that are enacted in certain aboriginal rites of passage. But then there seems to be another vast area in the psyche where people seem to move into mythological realms. But what's amazing is not only that this mythological realm literally erupts into the psyche, but that it crosses the culture barriers. Somebody who might be Jewish or Christian at this point will start experiencing mythology of the pre-Columbian period. Campbell. People who have taken some of the psychedelic mushrooms that were used in Middle America have told me. 68. The vision quest. That they begin to have images that resemble those of the Aztec gods. Have you heard of this kind of thing? Highwater. Yeah, I've heard of it. Campbell. Of course, I haven't done it myself, so I can't say. Highwater. I've heard it, but I wonder how much of that may be auto-suggestive. Campbell. Buddha was speaking about someone who's they're serious about this, Albert Hoffman, the man who synthesized LSD, and who was very much interested in this matter. The very special qualities of those Toltec deities. I couldn't believe it. At least thesis a report from somebody who I regard as at least a reputable authority in these matters. I was trying to associate this with what you were saying, that certain psychedelics produce images of this type, others produce images of another type. Among the Huichol Indians, for instance, the peyotes regarded as a good psychedelic entity, but then there is the counter one, the gyms on weed, which is regarded as negative, and these two are opposed to each other. It must be the result of different images coming out of this experience from those that come out of the other one. ROGERGUILLEMEN. But yet, if you study something like psychedelic experiences, you also have to consider green tea, which is loaded with caffeine or molecules like caffeine. And it is very well known that this has a profound influence on the function of some people. The mode of action is very well understood of these enzymes on the brain, which actually excite the functions of the brain, so that this is a statement of fact. So does this relate to the brightness of the young Japanese? It's hard to say, Booty don't think you would get that kind of stimulation from milk or Perrier water. Highwater. I just meant that there have been a lot of discussions, as Campbell knows, about the iconography of Middle America and Indian America that may be identified with what was fundamentally a drug-oriented culture. Campbell. Oh, boy, they really were drug-oriented. Laughter. Highwater. Yes, 'swas very possible that after all those visions there could very well arise so me art. Booty wonder if we would really like to impose the concept on the entire world of art. of the Freudian notion that art is nothing more than a result of dietary disturbance or psychological disturbance. 69. The hero's journey. I would like to think of art as fundamental that it existed in concentration camps. Music was written in concentration camps, opera was written there. We have come to think of the settings as so much as a product of an elite leisure society. But, as you say, art seems to be such a fundamental human expression that it would seem to exist whether we're using Jimson weed or not. These may be lubricants to a kind of experience, but perhaps what we're talking about predates both psychologically and biologically any of these effects. Campbell. Oh, I do think they do. In fact, most artists have not been taking drugs. And those who did take drugs, you can see it in their art, in the very special effect that comes along. In English literature you have Coleridge as an example of someone who was doing a certain kind of work then started taking opium on the hottest season of great productivity and then it all ran out. Guillemen, as Rimbaud seems to have. Campbell. Exactly the same. Guillemen. What we're talking about, or perhaps trying to discuss and dissect, is what was the very beginning, long before even some sort of a tribal movement could start, giving the framework of the very earliest manifestations of what was later to be called art. I would not beat all against the idea that, by sheer empiricism one day the eating of this seed blended to another may well have triggered in this particular man a drawing of something new, which later of course became a part of that particular local culture. Once you have that, all sorts of things can happen later and so that in latter times you don't need the triggering mechanisms anymore, because it will come from the environment. But at the beginning I don't see why I call not start with some happenstance like that. Campbell. The earliest evidence that we have of ritual life comes from the period of Neanderthalman. This would be about 150,000 to 50,000 BC. The evidence is associated with 270. The Vision Quest. Orders of Phenomena. Oni's burial. Here, for the first time, we have evidence of a ritualized burial, with sacrifices and with the grave gear, which certainly indicates that the experience of death started something. The question is, what the shop into this body? It was walking around, it was swarm, it lay down, it was cold. Where has it gone? This idea of where it has gone is the first clue we have to a mythological thought. Then the next big period of evidence is that of the Cro-Magnon people in southwestern France and northern Spain. There are warders of art there. There is the plastic art, which is represented by the little female figurine, just standing nude figurines, no face features, no feet either. They were probably made to stand up. In fact, some of them were found standing up in little shrines. The seer associated with the domestic areas, the legends under which people live. So here is the goddess, the figurine, the female power, all associated with the life of the people in their homes. Then the sea great caves. Have you ever been in them? Nobody would live in those. They are sheerly cold, dangerous, and dark. I remember when we were in the caves of Pecmerle, France, the concierge who was showing us through hut out the electric light and you have never been in Attica placing your life. You didn't know what direction you were facing in. Your whole consciousness was swiped out. It is in those caves that these animal figures appear. You find there is an order in the organization of these animals. We know that the animals are representing powers of some kind. The Sekavisa real most certainly associated with the Boiserites, Themonstrites, where they are returning boys intiman, and they are learning not only how to pray to the animals and promise them compensation for their willing sacrifice, but they are also learning how to be men instead of mother's little boys. And they're having a hard time. There is one cave, Les Trois Frères, in the Pyrenees, where the main chamber was entered through a long flume, which is almost like a great big sewer pipe, that runs on for 100 yards or so. You have to crawl through like this. Booty would be unable to do it because I have a kind of claustrophobia. I can't imagine what the experience must have been. But Herbert Kiananda, number of Fothers went through this darn thing, and when you come out you are in an enormous chamber with hundreds of animal forms all over the sides. Right in front of you is this dancing animal master called the Sorcerer of Les Trois Frères, with the antlers. 71. The Dancing Sorcerer, of the Magdalenian Cave Les Trois Frères. Drawing after Breuil, Ariege, France. Paleolithic. W.H. Dollar. The Hero's Journey. And the Owl's Eyes and the Lion Body. There's your animal master again, associated with food, animals, the mystery of death, and the participation in this order of life, which is that life lives on life, lives by killing, and the reconciliation of the psyche with this nieces. City. These animals were respected and sometimes regarded as higher powers than the human beings. Guillemen. Joseph, do you discuss this actually as the origins of mythology, or as a time when, as far as we know, humanity for the first time became somehow aware of the mythological dimension? Because there is this Jungian point of view that would see mythology as something that is really woven into the very fabric of reality. Or one that perceives reality in some sense, rather than somehow derives from the human experience. Campbell. I follow philosophers up to the point where their feet leave the ground. Laughter. What I'm talking about is first evidences. There is one bit of evidence earlier, and that comes from the period of Homo erectus, before Homo sapiens, before Neanderthalman, about 500,000 BC. From the River Thames. A hondak that's very long, too big to use, but is symmetrically beautiful. This is what Robinson Jeffers called divinely superfluous beauty, and is the first sign now we have of wealth is not simply a practical tool, but something that is a beautiful, beautiful piece of stone. No animal would do anything like that. The only thing you can guess from it is for a ritual of some kind, a ritual associated probably with the sacrifice of animals. A Chulian handak from Farnham, Surrey, England. Campbell called this image a prime example of the crossing of the threshold into the symbolic function of art, what California poet Robinson Jeffers called divinely superfluous beauty. Guillemen. What you cite about the significance of the arts, the liberal arts, as you call them, is exactly to be found in modern science. I feel terribly bad as a scientist that so few people nowadays recognize the extraordinary beauty of the reasoning in modern science. So very few people realize that the extraordinary. I would like to see the exact word and I'm afraid I'm not going to find it. Significance of scientific reasoning, which is just to sell it. Ing for whoever is in the middle of it is in painting or the writing. 7.2. The Vision Quest. Ofupam reading or listening to a piece of music. It really will give you this very same sort of elation. Scientific reasoning and the creations of science have just the same glory as the creation so far tended like Dolly Stave and record. Brown. One night Roger called me and took me to his laboratory at the Salk Institute. And form that was like an experience of being sung a solo by Sutherland or Callas or anyone. You provided form the equivalent of an opera by describing what you do. It was an art form and it's a beautiful art form. Guillemen. I'm so glad to hear you say that. Faux. Canard. Can science develop its own mythology? As powerful as the mythologies of the past to sustain us through the times? Guillemen. That's an interesting question, which I somehow wanted to bring in with one word: prediction. Science can predict. Can mythology predict? Campbell. I think so. In intuiting the morphology of an organic process, it would represent the intuition, the prediction that you are going to get old, that you are going to die. Guillemen. That's not fair. Laughter. That's not fair. High water. Dostoevsky discovered the unconscious, right? There are all kinds of examples in which artists have predicted things. Weren't the cubistriali talking about what contemporary physics is talking about now? Guillemen. I think they are talking about the idea that there are many ways of looking at the same objects, rather than the empiric alone of being a camera. Campbell. With classical structure the early temples were bodies. The classic temple is a physical temple, it is the outside. The inside is almost nothing in that little cellar out there. The glory of the physical form and the classic alidea of the universe is not of a universe at all but of a multiverse, just as Jamaica said, to the American Indian. 73. The hero's journey. But the science of the Greeks and the Romans never got past the body. The atom was a little marble and the highest art. Form was the standing nude, and the culminating empire was one that could be view e das a body. Spengler tracked that with the dynamics of the Gothic cathedral and the energy principle in our culture. The atomized now in energy and the flight into outer space is a consistent form of which art is own expression, not the predicting one, Boudon expression, and science another expression. Alephita's single-sided structure of consciousness. Boudafart, a Cezanne's, Isa harmony parallel to nature, Asaf said, then the exploration of nature should be less exciting and no less spiritually rewarding than the function of art. I mean, it's the same field. When one is bliss is actually science, as it is for many young boys, I Thastobi. I can remember that when I was in prep school, biology was the thing that grabbed me, and now I think of mythology as a function of biology, a statement of the impulse system of the body and the organs. Not something that's made up in the head. What's made up in the head is the fiction. What comes out of the heart, Isomyth. The seer totally different things alto get her. So I would just like to do what you've said about science. I think it's one of the calamities of contemporary literary criticism that the say two worlds are totally separated. Groff. There are even more areas where science touches on art. For example, in formulating some kind of hypotheses you would be drawing on a mythical form, the idea of evolution, and soon many of the major discoveries in science would be done actually in a dreamlike state, in a visionary state, after the scientist had a lot of observation, collected the data, tried to analyze, and not been able to find a solution. The solution comes in a dream or upon waking in the morning, or in a disease, and fever. When all the rational forms are suspended the mythical form breaks through. Arrien. Maybe what prediction is to science, the oracle is to mythology. Guillemen. But in the predicted power of mythology, how statistical is it? Will it really happen when the prediction is made? High water. Can you build a skyscraper out of wedding cakes? Laughter. It is just the semiconductor question. Guillemen. The answer is definitely no. High water. The question has nothing to do with the whole. 74. The Vision Quest. Basis of mythology. The empirical question that you ask is a Plato of Aladone, but mythology serves the ineffable, serves the unfathomable, serves everything that we can deal with in terms of aerodynamics. If we call deal with our entire experience in terms of the empirical or in terms of the practical, then there would be no reason for any of this discussion. Foe, Campbell. I may have an idea here. The whole space adventure interests me and has interested me from the beginning, enormously. I can remember the space flight. I don't know which number it was, before the one with Armstrong stepping on the moon. When, as the astronauts were coming down, ground controlling, Houston asked, "Who's navigating now?" And the answer that came back was, "Newton." And that sort of blew me away. Immediately I thought of Kant in the Prolegomena Metaphysics, where he asked, "How is it that we can make statements for relationships in this state here, knowing with absolute certainty that they're going to work in that state there?" And this was demonstrated in that particular moment. We did not know how deeply Armstrong's foot was going to go into the dust on the moon until we saw it happen. That was a posteriori knowledge, that was knowledge after the fact. But the scientist knew exactly how much energy to expend from that tilted jet that tilted in a certain way to bring that little module down within a mile of a boat in the Pacific Ocean. This just seemed a bit horrific that the laws of space as far as they go right here in the head and can be worked out here. So, in a sense, are the children of space and have come out of one of space's productions, namely, the Earth, spinning around the sun, and we have come out of the Earth and we are the Earth. And we're the Earth stars and dies and so forth. This involves a very important kind of realization. 75. The Hero's Journey. Russell Schweikart's spacewalk. And then, he said, I had to ask myself what had I ever done to deserve this experience. Now another thing that I've learned about space. About a year and a half ago I was on a platform with one of the astronauts, Russell Schweikart. Had old off a time when he was given an extravehicular action to perform, let's say to get out of the module when he's flying through space. Onda, SJUSTINTHESPACESUITCON 76. The Vision Quest. Necked head by the umbilical cord to the module, and he was to do some photography, or whatever, around the machine with the counterpart work going on inside the module. But something went wrong. Inside the module Sotha that was left for 5 minutes with nothing Toto. Now those semen were given a lot of backup them right on the ball so that they should not have the kind of experience that this man had at this time. He was out there one in space, going 17,000 miles an hour. There was not a sound, there was no breath of air, and up there was the Earth, and out there was the moon. No just holding your head for a minute what is happening to that guy. And then, he said, I had to ask myself what had I ever done to deserve this experience. That is Odysseus hearing the sirens. And this is exactly the conflict field, you know, between this and the practical action he was capable of. He had to pull himself together to go back into that machine and return to work. There is the enormous difference between those two worlds. That reality is enormous. 77. Woman, in the pic. Ture language of mythology represents the totality of what can be known. The hero is the one who comes to know. Ash progresses in the slow initiation, which is life, the form of the goddess undergoes for Hema series of transfigurations. Shekin, never be greater than himself, Thashi, can always promise more than he is yet capable of comprehending. Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces. Joseph Campbell and Jean Erdman at their honeymoon cottage in Woodstock, New York, 1938. M.A. Carrot. The meeting with the goddess. One of Joseph Campbell's early students was Jean Erdman, a dancer, who was training with Martha Graham. She took advantage of Sarah Lawrence's avant-garde tutorial program by taking a private course in aesthetics with Campbell. Before long, Campbell later recalled, it became evident to me that I was shocked. When she left on a year-long around-the-world trip with her family, the smitten professor gave her a copy of Spengler's Ponderous The Decline of the West to read on the journey, ensuring that she would have to see him when she returned, at least to find out what the implications of the book might be. Faramanta Cruz worked. They were married shortly after her return in 1938, and for the next 50 years worked within arm's reach of each other, vigorously pursuing their parallel careers. Here at each day's work. Told her in the evenings, and she asked for his reflections on her pioneering modern dances. Their collaboration culminated in the founding of New York's Theater of the Open Eye in 1972. In 1941, another of Campbell's students, Sue Davidson Lowe, introduced him to Swami Nikhilananda, the pastor of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center in New York City. Campbell spent the next few years working with Nikhilananda on the Sanskrit translations of the Upanishads and the Gospel of Sri Rama Krishna, the 19th century Tantrist saint. In 1954, after completing 3 volumes of Heinrich Zimmer's lectures on Indian art and philosophy, Campbell traveled to India for 6 months with the personal guidance of Nikhilananda and Indian scholar Alfred Samani, studying the holy sites while Erdman staged solo dance concerts. 79. 79 Phi tilde. Brown. Jean, can you describe how your own art and your dance have come together and, in particular, how, tilde Hawaii itself influenced you? JEANERDMAN. Well, I can tell you, I'm a child of Hawaii. I was born here. I'm the 3rd generation of my family to be born here. It's wonderful to be back here because all the memories of childhood come flooding back. I never thought we'd move to Hawaii. I never thought Joe would want to move to Hawaii. But there we are. Joe always teased me. He said that my external soul washer eat mokalia, which it is, I think. I grew up doing what we all do here, which is dance. And we all danced the hula, and we danced in school. We also danced Isadora Duncan style, which, as you know, comes from Harideo imitating the ancient Greeks. Swa was based on the natural body. Both of those dances Sarah performed in bare feet. When I went to New York and found the modern dance in Martha Graham, she was in bare feet, so I'm a barefoot dancer. The world was quite integrated around my source. Of course, the contrast between the Martha Graham style and my background was enormous in terms of style, but that only helped me to find my own image. Finally, I found myself pondering what dance really is. I studied many different styles of dance, traditional styles, the Spanish dance, ballet dance. I spent a long summer on these studies. In fact, it was the summer Joe and I spent at Nantucket near the end of World War E. Everyone was afraid to cross the water for fear of a German submarine. But we had throughout this beautiful house with roses on it. Joe was writing about the 5th version of The Hair with a Thousand Faces, and he was deciding what the art of the dance really should be, right? I was making comparisons of all these traditional styles and trying to find out why there had been this choice in the Spanish dance, which somehow achieved a certain feeling which 80. The hero. There is what I would call the hero journey, the night sea journey, the hero quest, where the individual is going to bring forth in his life something that was ne'er beheld before. Joseph Campbell, Blackfoot Medicine Man, 1 Nes Toe, The White Buffalo, George Catlin, 1848. T. Dollar, asterisk. The Death of Socrates, Jacques Louis David, 1787. Jatino Arcat The Coronation Oj Charles I II. Jean Auguste de Minck Ingres, 154. Sir Galahad, Arthur Hughes, about 1. Madame Marie Curie at the Institut du Radium. In Paris, 1925. Sudama approaching the Golden City of Krishna, from the Bhagirata Punjab Hills, India, about 1785. Pablo Picasso at this villa, La California, near Cannes, France, 1956. Photo copyright Arnold Newman. George Aoki Featherghost Ranch, 1968. Photo copyright Arnold Newman. Carrot. The Meeting with the Goddess. Gene Erdman and Joseph Campbell en route to Honolulu, 1946. Expressed their culture. Thesamy with Bullet and soon. So I realized that what choice one made, as to the limitations of movement, was going to be key to the expressivity of the dancer and the dance art. When I started doing my own choreography, that was the way I worked. I worked in perfect silence because that was the only way in which the essential expressivity of the human body movement can be listened to and found, by listening to the dynamic rhythm of what one is doing. And also with this I'd thought some kind of an image in it of the first dance that I ever did, that I still do, and have taught to other dancers, based on the archaic Greek image of the Medusa. Now the Medusa, as Joe has told me, started as a lovely precept in the temple. Shawasa dedicated that their focus was only 81. The Hero's Journey. Janista dancing what Vivaldi's to music. Alan Watts, In My Own Way. Jean Erdman in a graceful, half-moon shape, pose inspired by her work with Martha Graham, about 1936. In one direction. She couldn't look any other way, so that whenever other movements came, she could only go from side to side. There was no roundness. The idea of seeing, finding out who she was as a god, was something that really caught her. And then she goes through this whole thing of facing this mirror image, as it were, and finally, after many movements through, there was release. From that, the pair of opposites is always there until one can find the center. Then in the center one can move and then go freely. Fo. 82. The Meeting with the Goddess. Brown. How much influence did Joe have on your work? Watching you and imagining Joe watching you, and imagining you listening to Joe Erdman. It was wonderful because I would go for these emotional developments, these transforming moments in life. I used to call them rooms, states of being. And Jothan would put the names to them. Henengundance, Medusa, Budi had already done it from the point of view of an organic life. The Majorcho Rayo graphic work was trying to pick out moves that would show the differences in these states of being. Every dance needs to have its own vocabulary. For every work Kyoto you create the universe anew. You create the experience of time, and create the experience of space, and you create the experience of dynamic strength, sand flow and control. That kind of energy, the energy process, ISUSED in a separate way for each separate piece. I've had a marvelous time, a wonderful time, doing all this. Brown. How did you develop your own career after dancing with Martha Graham? Erdman. I had a wonderful time developing choreography for both the company and the solo. Andy actually went around the world as a solo performer with my own choreography. I continued doing performances in New York with my dance companion till I got this inspiration to work with the Anna Livia Plurabella female figure James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Well, my husband, as you know, had been working on Finnegan's Wake when we first were married. I swore I would never read that book. Because I was on one arm and Finnegan's Wake was on the other arm, and he spent just as much time with Finnegan's Wake as he did with me. It took me some years to get over that booty did. Time mellows everything, right? So I took T. Sidave and Olivia Pluribel and I discovered that in order to create hair in all aspects, you can me type of woman thatch isn't, I needed to see James Joyce's language, and that meant I had to have actors and they had to be people who could deal with Shakespeare, at least, in order to do Finnegan's Wake. We had a marvelous time making that happen. Joe Academy, studio and Gavitt Woe readings from Finnegan's Wake. We had invited all the actors that had been recommended to me around New York to come and hear this, to see if they wanted to participate in this workshop. That was back in 1961. The idea of story and dance hadn't 83. The hero's journey. Jean Erdmanina performance from her off-Broadway show, The Coach with the Six Insides, 1962. Being involved and I didn't even know he was doing anything unusual. And then we had the good luck of opening off-Broadway in 1962 and being invited after playing a whole season and winning a couple of awards and going to Spoleto, to Ireland, to Japan, and various places around the United States and Canada. It was in Italy, France, and Japan that we found out that because our theater was action theater, each country thought that we reminded them of their own action theater, their own total theater. The kabuki in Japan, the commedia in Italy, and the French mime, and soon. And the language was understandable to the same extent everywhere because of Finnegan's Wake. That piece brought me into total theater, which had been a hope of mine that I'd almost forgotten. The idea that real theater, the theater I thought would be most exciting, would involve all the performing arts. Brown. How did the theater of the open eye come about? Erdman. The theater of the open eye was a combination of Joe Campbell doing seminars and Gene Erdman creating total theater works. And that's where we have continued for about 14 or 15 years. I've made a piece about Paul Gauguin of Tahiti, which was developed using my Polynesian background, and another one based on Hawaiian myth, the legend of Pele, the great goddess of the volcano, which we call the Shining House. Now I'm working on a piece of Greek mythology that might be performed in Greece, actually, at the Athens Festival. Less than BC. ROBERTCOCKRELL. Joe, would you say something about marriage as a mythological event? Campbell. My notion of marriage is that if marriage isn't a first priority in your life you are not married. It's an extremely important decision, that of marriage, because it does amount to and require a yielding, and the yielding has to be taught alto now being a member of Odyat and acting in relation to that tunis. Asiv said to people who are worried about it, when you make what you call a sacrifice to the other person, that's not what you are sacrificing to. You're sacrificing to their relationship. The relationship is the 84. The meeting with the goddess. Sacrificial field, where both of you are relating to the relationship and then you are, as it were, two together. Really like that yin-yang thing. If you hang on to being the yin, or hang on to being the yang in this thing, as a separate unit, you don't have a marriage. Then everything in your life from the non relates to that relationship. And when judgments of actions and decisions at various times have to be taken in that sense, then you're married. The marriage has two stages. The first is what might be called the biological marriage. ITYIELDS the family. But then there comes what I would call the mystical marriage, or theochemical marriage. You see so many families where that doesn't occur. I've been shocked by news from one or another of my friends, people who have already had their family, and you thought, what a lovely marriage. And then you hear, oh, we're vegan apart. But if you have been cooperating at all, that sense of identity really matures. It is there and it's a reality. It's a funny thing, people think that this is what marriage is about, and this is what marriage is about, and that is what marriage is about, and that is what marriage is about. What marriage is about is marriage, and that means marrying. ARRIEN. Is there such a thing as love or romance that isn't a projection? Or is it just a projection of this ideal image that we're uniting with? Campbell. I have really found when I look around that the romantic love I see is this ideal, the anima. The anima is the ideal that you carry within yourself that you put on to the different entities out there and you unite with that. Pretty soon you see through the projection. And then what happens? Andreessen. Is there such a thing as a grand romance that lasts? LAWRENCEFAVROT. It's a good question. Sometimes when you're at young, for example, it's almost as if there is no room for true romance to exist because everything ultimately is a projection in his scheme of putting on the anima or animus. I wonder. 85. The hero's journey. Campbell. The ideal of marriage is to let this projection dissolve and accept what comes through. When that's done, you can have a really very rich love relationship that goes on and on. ARRIEN. Where does your twinkle twinkle principle fit in? Campbell. Laughs. I'm trying to think of a context. Normally an individual grows up with a certain social circle, what I call the village compound. As long as you can acquiesce in the tasks and the ideals of the group that you are involved in, you can live very decently in a situation of that kind. If you find yourself not at home there, irritated, and your idea and ideals begin to shift around, the end there takes place a total transformation in the psyche of relationships. The ego and its spur pose begins to lose hold and unconscious ideals come up. And there are red warders. One that is threatening, what Jung calls the shadow. Thesis what I call the Knock knock, principal, when one ace and fearphones on self. I remember hearing a nice little gentleman say, if I weren't Tagad Christiani would be a terrible person. Thesist, knock knock. Letting unconscious content come up is dangerous in that sense. Then there comes the allure of the exotic. Much more interesting. Thesi call the twinkly twinkle principle. Those are the two movements that come in when you begin to lose confidence in your moral stance. But the matter of falling in love, someone walks in the room and that's it. Bang. You think, thesis it, thesis my life. Thesis something that occurs in many, many romances, not only in Europe but in Asia as well. I've had that experience myself. So what is it you're in love with? You don't know who this is, and you don't know who that is, you don't know what the person is. If you marry someone onto whom this has been projected, it is bound to happen thought the person beggars to show through. Then you can face the problem. What are you gonna know? Are you going to say, well, I'm disillusioned, I'm going to take my possession back and have it ready for repossession? The other possibility is to say, okay, I accept this. Then something else happens. The projection gradually either disappears or goes back. Then around the age of 35 or 40. What my mother used to call the dangerous 40s. It gets out there again. Then you have that problem, the Tristan and Isolde problem, you might say. 86. The meeting with the goddess. Sacred and profane love. Titian, circa 1514. ARRIEN. Do you think that there is more loving out of need than loving out of love? Because if you're projecting, then how can you really be loving? Campbell. That's just what I saying. Yield the projection and accept what's there. That's Caledon ordeal. ARRIEN. Was that why you said that passion over the years changed to compassion? Campbell. Yes. That's the only way to get through. With compassion. Passion is different. With passion you want to possess. The conversion of passionate to compassion is the whole problem of marriage. ARRIEN. How do you define moral in relationship to love? Campbell. Doing what the society tells us to do. That's what is moral. It is different from one society to another. ARRIEN. Then should morals play a part in love? Campbell. Should they? If you say should, the end of course they should. But do they? I would say no. Alice fair in love and war outside the moral frame. The problem is to bring the two so that they don't collide. Each of you says but half of the entire original being and of the journey through to completion. If you're good, you'll find the right other half. If you have the right purpose, it'll be the right one. 87. The hero's journey. Getting a perspective on our sexual relations hipslays us. Know that they are not biologically grounded, they are culturally grounded. And our culture is not a fixed thing. Right now it's on a process of transformation. There is no reason why we should regard ourselves as committed to this system or that. Thesis a point that I think is very important. Why don't they have to wait for society to wake up? The important thing is for the individual to find his or her own way in the field. Society will come along to get it wrong another way in a few centuries. But meanwhile the individual can find within himself or herself these qualities that have been assigned to the female and what have been assigned to the male. They're unconditional. We can seek those things within ourselves. Faux P9. Cockrell. I read that paper by Canton, The Beautiful and the Sublime. One of the things she talks about there is that women are beautiful and men are sublime. And he says that one of the functions of the Melisto implant the sublime in women, so that it develops in her, and as her beauty fades she becomes sublime. My feeling was that this went even further. I felt that if you associated man with the sun and woman as grounded in the earth, it was that dynamic in just fertilizing the female, not just in her womb but also in her mind, awakening the sublime in her. Campbell. I would say first that Kant wasn't married. A married philosopher is a contradiction in adjectives. I remember that particularis say of his, and there is an phrase that comes out in Dante's discussion of beauty and the sublime thought this died with me and made me feel that Kant was a potential poet. He said that blue eyes are beautiful, dark eyes are sublime. And this indicates the problem. The problem is beauty and the sublime. Beauty invokes, the sublime shatters. The sublime is experienced, I mean real sublimity, with enormous spaces or in areas of enormous power. For instance, if you were in a city with a saturation bombing taking place, you might experience the sublime. I mean that, as long as you are there, that's the sublime shatters, overpowers. 88. The meeting with the goddess. You trick yourself into destroying the position that you're holding. Every time I take an extra drink, I know what I'm doing. I hardly ever get out of the room but, thesis life, laughter. In fact, you know, there is an originum for whiskey, usquebaugh, which, when translated into English is, water of life. And Nietzsche associates the Dionysian with drunkenness, where the principle is broken, and the Apollonian then with the retaining of form. It's the experience of the mysterium tremendum. The beauty is the experience of the mysterium fascinans, that's the difference. Since woman is in herself fascinating, that's why Kant assigns beauty to woman, and the man is the destroyer and the killer. He always has been, and so high section is more on that level. That's why I said that. You know, the point is that women are saying, we're not mysterious. The fact is, they are a favorite. ID's the kind of difference between Narcissus lost in the beauty of the reflection, and Job, at the end, faced with the mysterium tremendum. Campbell. Yes, highs. Favorite. Notice shaving power beyond good and devil, it's just beyond human comprehension. Campbell. That's right. Kennard. We sometimes hear a sort of basic love story like boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. Is this just a Western hang-up? That you always shave the lose it and then rush around and do something tremendous to get it all back again, a surprise for being very hero I can do wonderful? Campbell. No, that's just a good storyline, laughter. Anyone who has studied writing stories knows you have to have a sort of black moment. They move toward disaster and then something that's been planted in the first paragraph or two comes up and rescues the hero. Kennard. How long has that storyline been going on? Are Indian love stories like that? Campbell. No, although some of them are. But I think that's a sort of Saturday Evening Post story, laughter. 89. The Hero's Journey. Joanhalifax. Joseph, how have women inspired you in your life? Tell me about your experience with women, with pure anima, because I've worked with you 4 years. Campbell. Anime's never pure, laughter. TARNAS, touche. Halifax. What is it? What is it? Campbell. It's a life contaminated, you might say, BYA local example. Halifax. For example? Campbell. Anima. As they say in the alchemical system, anima mercuria, keeps changing forms. The anima comes forth but one doesn't know anything about it until it finds residence in a certain person. I was just comparing these right around me now. They are every different from each other. So what's anima? It always has a historical reference and a psychological ground. Their problem of life is relating the set woe. You have a psychological beginning and you have a historical initiation and then, what are you going to do with this goddamned thing? It shows itself to be every different from what you expected and you have to deal with this showing through of the historical fact. The problem of marriage is exactly that. You marry a projected anima, but what you really have married isn't. Only a projected anima budafact. What you thought you had and what you actually got is the problem of, what's all we call it, the disillusionment. That is to say, you must take back the anima. You can go away and I'll project this over here. Then you'll have the same problem all over again. I think the problem today is that or rather, we're given to think that marriage is going to be a long love affair. And that you're gonna have a lot of fun of the anima. The fact. You are no having fun after the first 10 minutes. You're in confrontation with a problem and did turns into an ordeal. The ordeal. Iso acquiescing. The poor anime tething that's gotta go, to vanish. You've married this phenomenon and it's not quite what I thought you were going to get. Then the acquiescence in the characteristic of life is here exhibited as what we call maturation. Foe. 90. The meeting with the goddess. Halifax. You know, in my world I call men's inability to accept the anima in their own nature, animasicness. Campbell. No, you've got to throw the anima dissolve the anima out. Shelock you're about 5 years later, after the marriage, and then you have to deal with it. That's another problem, particularly if the wife forgets that's high as the incarnation of the anima. Halifax. Booty know that the anime has played an incredibly important part in your life, in your development. Campbell. Taught women for 38 years. I've had it all over the place. Halifax. Asmith she has many historical names. She's been a character, a presence, which has formed your intellect. Campbell. Her name is Jean, Joan, and Jane. Halifax. How has she inspired you? What has given you? Campbell. This is biography and I just don't like biography. Halifax. Not so much biography. Campbell. And my field is comparative mythology. Halifax. Joseph, today I heard you say that teaching women at Sarah Lawrence taught you that you have to understand mythology not from just the point of your comparative mythology but in terms of reference. Campbell. Thank you. You have saved me the trouble of saying that. That was what I was about to say. That this subject is really a very large academic field of facts, all over the place. One can be interested in those in a purely academic way and you can write articles for the various journals. Bhutan teaching. Women I found they we real ways asking to know the relationship of these materials to their own living. And this interest of women in life is something that is far more emphatic than the masculine interest in footnotes. Men can be too interested in the interesting mechanical details. Teaching women held med others and so. I've cited many times. It's my female students who taught me what the life value of these forms is. Foe. 91. The Hero's Journey. Campbell and Roseanne Zucat, Esselin, 1982. ROZANNEZUCCHET. Do you feel that women need to begin to feel better about themselves again or that society needs to change and reevaluate some of its values? Campbell. No, all they have to do is stop looking at the boys and wondering whether they're in competition with them. Just realize what effect they're having on the boys. It commitome. At Sarah Lawrence, I was teaching these courses on mythology and at the end of my last year there this woman comes in and sits down and says, well, Mr. Campbell, you've been talking about the hero. But what about the woman? I said, The woman's Timothera of the hero, she's the goal of the hero's achieving, she's the protectress of the hero, she is this, she's that. What more do you want? She said, I want to be the hero. So I was glad that I was retiring that year and not going to teach anymore. Laughter. AUDIENCEQUESTION. What do you think about the women who pick their careers out of love, or are motivated into a career because of love? 92. The meeting with the goddess. Campbell. Women have been doing this for ages in our culture. The ability of women to get the life sense of the career field that the Yarain is most remarkable. Is that what you were speaking about? AUDIENCEQUESTION. No, I mean a woman who chooses a certain career because she feels the love in that work. Like a teacher who loves children or anybody who just happens to love to work with numbers or has a feeling for her work. Campbell. I think anyone who chooses a career for any other reason I salute. I mean, there's the way to choose your life to do something just to get a job. But if you don't love what you're doing, you're not in it at all. AUDIENCEQUESTION. But in the state of being in love or appreciation or whatever it is, wouldn't the achievement level, the competitive level, wouldn't that sort of make it alright if reason is for love? Campbell. I'm not against achievement. No, the problem is that in this woman movement they started it in a perfectly legitimate way. A woman doing these amehobas aminato get equivalent pay. That's the way it started, but now it comes that women are losing the appreciation for their own domestic life, their own domestic potentialities, to bring up children and so forth. They are returning it all over to the state and the schools. ZUCCHET. What about women who gone to the creative fields? Campbell. My wife is a dancer and those women have no problems. I know lots of them. Women who go into the arts. A world in which one participates not in competition with somebody else but in her own development and relationship. ARRIEN. I think that's true of too. TARNAS. Love of the arts rather than love of achievement works for women, you mean? Campbell. An artist is not in the field to achieve torial eyes, but to become fulfilled. It's a life-fulfilling, totally different structure. ARRIEN. Remaining in touch with your intuitive sense? Campbell. Exactly. And it doesn't matter whether you're first, second, third rate in the public eye. Each artist, know them, I send fulfillment in his or her own way. It is not a competitive field. ARRIEN. Your art is your life then. 93. The hero's journey. Campbell. Right. Commercial art is something else. I mean direct, creative art. Brown. But maybe ordinary people who might not think of themselves as artists can indeed be artists. Campbell. The problem with being an artist is you have to practice a technique. This turned up when my wife Jean came here to Salem 1 year. She's a professional dancer, and in her teaching she's teaching people who want to dance. And there's a lot of chores just moving your legs around, hanging onto a bar. I was lecturing on mythology and Jean was going to do something with her dancers. In the evening, well, she was just terribly discouraged. I said, oh, Jeannie, what's the matter? She said, they just want the excellent experience. So the next day I looked out the window and saw Jean with her pupils. She had them opening their arms to the sun and rolling downhill and skipping around. It pointed to a very important matter with respect to the arts. There are two totally different aspects. The thing that irritated Jean was that these people were calling this thing creative art. It's not. It's therapeutic. Here is a person woes off the rails trying to get back onto the rails by means of art. That's artist therapy. But the artist hoys on the rails and works out of that sense. That's a totally different thing. Both are perfectly okay, but yet is good to know the difference. You don't ask a professional dancer to know how to handle people who don't want to dance. Dancers are the most terrific artists. Dancing and singing, I think, are the most difficult arts because the body is an instrument, and since it has to be in perfect trim, that's what you're working for all the time. AUDIENCEQUESTION. In my mind I often juxtapose the words hero and artist. They both are on this heroic path and then are finding themselves. That's a goal for both of them. So beyond just knowing the technique there's that inner spirit that's very important to an artist. Maybe you can say it is that feeling inside, of benefits running down a hill, that is what makes an artist, as Muchos technique. Campbell. You're bringing a heretical position here, laughter. You get very sloppy art out of that sort of thing. Canard. In so many societies in the past women didn't seem to have been the artists. They didn't seem to have run societies. Every suften you get a society that is a matriarchy. 94. The meeting with the goddess. Perhaps where women appeared in control for 100 years or more. Now what happens there if women are for being and men are for acting? Campbell. There are certain fields in the arts, we think of them more as crafts, where women dominated. Aloft arts. Weaving and basket making, pottery, the certain art shaving todo with sewing and embroidery. Those women's works. Canard. But do you think men fall in love with women more if women are not doing, but just being? Campbell. Oh, that's just a statistical problem. The three ideals of women in traditional societies are the woman as mother and wife, the woman as courtesan, and woman as athletic warrior. Girl. Those are the three ideals. Fo, Psi, Arrien. What about Artemis? Campbell. There are two kinds of goddesses in mythologies. Ona is the primary goddess who's symbolic of the universe, of the earth and heavens and whatnot. She's the total being, total god. Theotherkon is the goddess who's the consort of the god. When a god-oriented mythology comes in, the whole scene shifts. Whereas in the goddess-oriented mythology the Melis subordinated to her, with the male mythologies the goddess is secondary. Now Artemis, of whom you asked, is the goddess of the first kind. She comes from the Old Bronze Age period, and Martin Nielsen, who's one of the major scholars in the whole field of classical religion mythology, regards Shira as the total goddess. When a number of goddesses, each of whom is a total goddess, begin to come together, which happens when you have a culture that spreads over a large territory and takes in people of other kinds, the goddesses become departmentalized. That is to say, each is given a certain portion of the god. This is Realmtorin to handle, and Artemis, the classical 5th century goddess of the hunt. That's a sentimentalization of the goddess of the wild things, who is herself the goddess of the forest and all the beasts that are in it. The goddess represents nature. The god represents society. And when you have a mythology that accents Sagado Vera goddess, you have a religion that accents society over nature. Then with the fall, nature itself is cursed. Joseph Campbell. 95. The Hero's Journey. A statue of Artemis from the sculpture garden of the Statens Museum for Kunst, Copenhagen, Denmark. In the very early periods the god and the animal are the same, and Artemis W as associated with the deer. She was the deer. The deer was Artemis. And then later, as the human aspect becomes more and more accented, the deer becomes shared companion. Persephone and Demeter were pig goddesses. The pig was a tremendously important figure in the Bronze Age. Circe is the one who was transmuted to swine, and so forth, and she is the initiator. She initiates Odysseus into the wisdom of the underworld, and the wisdom of the realm of light of her father, the sun. So these departmentalizations of goddesses are reductions, really. Highwater. We know looks at Eros and Logos, and let's remember what Socrates or Plato actually said. There are two forms of thinking. Onis permanent and fixed and logical, Moss. 96. The meeting with the goddess. Cullen and good, and its Logos. Theother, Eros, is intuitive and impermanent and not very good, and feminine. I think we've been stuck with that connotation. Arrien. We're stuck with that duality, the Logos, the log. I-cal mind, and the intuitive. That's setting up a duality, and I think that what's really necessary is a bridge, that West art creating the new model. Robertbly. How do you deal with Joseph's idea that the polarities of life are where the energies lie? Highwater. That's the problem. We're always talking about reuniting the psyche, but we always talk about the fact that it's essentially a process of making a duality into something else. Halifax. So long the psyche's not pairs of opposites only. Highwater. Right. Arrien. I think what's really involved here is the process that is associated with that beautiful mythobudan individual who has black hair and he walks with a panther be his-eyed ash eyes. Discovering who hides. And a Shebeastor discover who he's. His hair turns from black to brown and the panther changes into a leopard. And Ash fully realizes who hides. His hair turns fiery red. Then the person pinches the growth marks the leopard god from transforming into a beautiful because he wants the memory of the dark places. From where is come? I think that's the process that we're involved in. I think that there's an emerging process now where we're trying to get away from, or pinching, the dualities or polarities so that we can become something more. Campbell. I'd like to say I'm very much for duality, laughter. But problema show duality gets to be interpreted. Now in the grandiose mythological systems of the old world mythologies dating from Bronze Age times, we have two quite contrary systems. They appear, for example, in the Yin-Yang idea, and in the Hindu idea of male-female relationships. The woman is Shakti. In European, in the China, Japanarayang, themas. Cullen is regarded as the part that is associated with heaven, with solar life, with warmth, with action. And the female principle, the yin, is associated with darkness and moisture and water. It actually is Sodom that comes from the two sides of a stream, the side that is lighted by solar light and the side that is in shadow. One is dry, the other is moist. 97. The Hero's Journey. Buddha general the Melis regarded as the active and the female as the receptive. Thesis something that I think dominates northern thought in the Eurasian world, both in European and China. As one who grew up and was psychologically conditioned long before blue jeans came in, I have this observation to make. In the old days the male was dressed in black tie. He was recessive, and the women were beautiful, out and front. Now this was a characteristic of rather recent Occidental civilizations. When you turn to the Oriental or primitive societies, the women, like female birds, are quite recessive and the men have all the glory. The only place you get this in our society is in the military. But the women, nevertheless, are the ones who wear the feathers on dare out in front. Now the Shaz interest him enormously. The traditional way, and it's the way of animals, as well as what might be called the traditional societies, is that the male is the flowering thing. the glorious thing, and the woman is quite subdued Buddhist sup. Portive is the earth. And in those drums that are played in India, the deep-sounding ones, that's the female drum. And the one that goes brilliantly on, that's female drum. What happened in Western society was that a good deal of the organization of thinking with respect to sex was based on putting the woman forward. You take your hat off, or you used to, at least, in the elevator. Or when a woman comes into the room you give your seat to her. Now the woman begins to dress like a man. The man's dress hasn't changed, it's just deteriorated and receded into the background. And where the hell are we? We have unisex barbershops. It's ridiculous because the whole energy of life depends on polarity, and when you give that a pill you've got left is a blob, laughter. The end you have a shock when you travel to India. You learn that the active aspect of the idea of energy is Shakti, female. And the male is Sinert. Heist thou need to be activated. I thought, where did the system come from? Why this complete contrast? They're both perfectly true. One's related to the physical relationship and the other is the psychological. The male, psychologically, he just wants to be left alone. I've seen it. Very, very strongly. I don't know how the female sir, but God. The best time Sarif when you're just there, kid, and you are where it counts. 98. The meeting with the goddess. And then this lil Twinklebug goes be, and as Joyce says in Finna GCMS Wake, in Anna Livia Pluribel, the little rippling river stream. And she says, oh, wouldn't he be nice to start the world again? And I think, oh, goddamn, it really would. And The Malethenis activated. Now I think this is perfectly correct. The female is the activating principle, and then Shazam is that reactivated and co-meter like that. You know, laughter, high water. Are you saying women never become aggressive? Campbell. They're aggressive, it's already there in the twinkle star. It's another kind of aggression, the power of women. Is psychological and magical, do you see, and their aggression Isa. Magic alone. They're perfectly innocent, and oh boy, something's going on, and they say, oh, I'm not responsible, no, I just came. And hearing Nicolette, and look what has happened. Audiencequestion. Joseph, you once said that Maud. Man was kept in childhood for so long that there was a continent full of women in their mid-30s who were unloved and unmatched because their men had not grown up to them. I think that is one of our crises in our civilization today. Campbell. Whenever one gets from one social world into another, one gets aerial culture shock with respect to the male-female relationship. I remember when I went to India. Now I had spent years studying Indian philosophy that had nothing to do with boys and girls together. When I found myself in India I began to think, what the devil does this remind me of? There was never woman visible, except the street women, the women's elling vegetables or whatnot in the street. The women who are earthwives of the men whom you were consorting with were totally invisible. You'd see two policemen walking down the street holding hands, would you never see a man and a woman on the street together? I began to think, my God, the last time I experienced this was when I was in prep school. There are no women around, just males together. And there's another world. And there's another world. A great shock came to Mether in Orissa. So India is a prep school. The women are somewhere else. In Orissa I was staying in a hotel when I was there with the Indians and being entertained by some young Hindu gentleman. 199. The Hero's Journey. Afternoon I found myself walking hand in hand on the beach with an Indian, and he thought, if Jean should see me now. I said to him, well, I must thank you for the time that you have Jivanto entertain me here. And he said, oh, no, it is so fortunate. It is my holiday. I said, thesis your holiday and you are spending it with me, walking on the beach? Why aren't you going somewhere for a pleasant time with your wife and family? Oh, he said, we can't do nothing like that. It would be so complicated going anywhere with my family. So I just knew, my God, there is a total discontinuity between the lives of the males here and the family. This was an amazing experience to me. Bly. Joseph, can I ask you a question here? You say that you had learned Dalit from your female students at Sarah Lawrence about relating to the obsessions of the male to life itself. If you were talking to a young male now, in the United States, would you suggest to try to develop the feminine part of himself or the male part? Campbell. I'd say, find what it is your life career is going to be and learn to do it well. That would be my information. Whether he's male or female, that's something else again. My whole attitude toward pedagogy is, learn a job. And it's not going to be learned in a weekend. You've got to put yourself to it. What it takes to do that is what it takes to live your life. That's been me. Decision. Bly. So you come away to what Yeats calls passion. You're interested in finding out what a human being's passion is and then following that? Campbell. Yes. Let them go ahead and do. It may or may not involve male or female relationships. Those have to be handled in relation to the trajectory of what he has selected to be his career. 100. The meeting with the goddess. Foe. Tarnas. When you were talking about the difference in male and female roles in mythology, I was thinking about how Psyche and Eros met, and how there are many male heroes in Greek mythology and relatively few females, Psyche being an example of the exception. Could you talk about the difference between the two? Campbell. Mythologies always deal with traditional social situations. We are in a whole new phase right now. Women are released from the chores of domestic life, which absorbed everything they had. Now women are able to initiate careers for themselves. But typically in our Western civilization, men have been able to say, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. The women now are released, you might say, for that kind of thing. It creates a lot of problems because the only models they have in their chosen careers are female models. A lot of them lose their sense of what it is to be a woman by thinking that their value is one of achievement, not one of being, and it makes for very important problems. TARNAS. You're saying that achievement is more female? Campbell. Absolutely. Right from the very beginning. Just look, for example, at the early start we have, the art of the Paleolithic. The female figures are simply standing female nudes. Their power is in their body and their being and their presence. Many traditional societies regard magic as being originally the woman's possession in them and have stolen it or taken it from them because it's a woman's thing. Then look at the images of the male. They are always doing something, they're always representing something. They are in action. Generally in a primitive culture context, the woman is the onu who brings forth the species, nature, and the man is the one who brings forth society. Thus are the main polarities, and that comes right down the line. Eros and Psyche. Antique sculpture. Rome. Less than BC *P9. 101. The hero's journey. Favorite. Denies the problem in today's society that some women, in attempting to be more achievement-oriented, they're actually creating a rivalry between two people trying to achieve at the same time. And that's why their onion isn't lasting for any length of time? Campbell. The problem is not so much rivalry in achievement as the problem of the husband dealing with another person, on the other side of the tennis net, you might say. I have had this experience with my students. You see a student wake up to a whole new life possibility. That's a wonderful moment in teaching when that happens because you see a life career, a life trajectory, begin to show itself. Then you meet her 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, at the alumni reunions, and you can tell the Onuho's husband leather develop as a human being. The other possibility is that you see a man who marries and expects a wife. Well, we have the archetype of what a wife is. And it's a very helpful archetype. Both lines can develop, Budits, in relationship to a fame and career, principally, and the woman's with the children. But when you have had careers in the house and the individual developments are on two not always parallel courses, there's a lot of required, I mean real pedagogical participation to help the other person to develop as a human being and still hang on to the relationship. The thing that holds them together is making the relationship the top thing. It's for the relationship that the development of each is taking place. And when you make a sacrifice, you are not sacrificing to the other person, you are sacrificing to the relationship. That relationship involves the progress scion of your own life. So when people think of marriage as a continuous long love affair, then they are bound for trouble. Because it isn't. It isn't a proper sense on ordeal, laughter. And the ordeal is that of individual development. And if there isn't individual development taking place, well, what's the good of it? When you have a woman identifying with the animus, you get the usual business of the executive female. She has identified herself with the masculine aspect of her own life and she has lost her femininity. She becomes interested only in achievement. The unfortunate thing about it is that she doesn't realize why their own effects are on her environment. Her human relationship deteriorates. 102. The meeting with the goddess. All along the line. And then she begins to worry, what the hell's the matter here? I've watched it time and time again. This is what you call an animus woman, a woman animated by her intent to be male. It destroys her life as a woman. And not only that, but all of her relationships. P9. Kennard. Did Tristan and Isolde have individual development? Campbell. Now, Tristan and Isolde, this is a 12th century problem. All the societies of the world have had socially arranged marriages, not the individual one. Some of the early primitive people and some of the peasant societies will have that kind of thing. But in the structured society the family had made all the arrangements. Today in New Delhi, one of the major world cities, when you buy a newspaper there are columns of advertising for wives, and the advertisement has been put in neither by a marriage broker or the family. And the young women don't know whom they're going to marry. I have heard the daughters ask their brother, what is she like? They didn't see the person they are to marry until the wedding moment. Well, this still goes on. In the Middle Ages there was this same situation. Young women in the royal families and the aristocratic families were just political pawns. They would be sent there, or elsewhere, for all kinds of family relationships. Favorite. Which was politically more profitable? Campbell. Yes. And when the church sanctifies this, you hear about two bodies, one flesh, and all that. It was really two bank accounts in one. The aristocratic society there began to feel this was really degradation. And then love came in, and the meeting of the eyes, Asa. Much higher and more spiritual experience than marriage, and the. Ideo il amor. Kennard. Love was at 12th century invention? 103. The hero's journey. More old wounds Tristan. Chertsey Abbey tiles, circa 1270. Tristan teaches Isolde harp. Chertsey Abbey tiles, circa 1270. Campbell. No, but the celebration of love is superior to marriage in the troubadour tradition was. It's at that time in the southern part of France, in the proven call poetry, that the whole problem of love comes up. And/or psychological traditions begin right there, trying to analyze what love is. There was un great poet, Giraud de Bornil, around the middle of the 12th century. There were many discussions of what love was, but Giraud de Bornil's answer is one that really epitomized the sense of it all. He wrote, Thyserethi scouts for the heart and the eyes go forth to find animage to recommend to the heart. And when the image is found, if the heart is a gentle heart, that's the keyword, a heart that's capable not simply of lust but of love, and those are totally different things, then love is born. Asaph said, lust is simply the zeal of the loins for each other. Now Tristan the high work celebrating this mystery of love. King Mark never seen Iseult. Iseult had never seen King Mark. It was Tristan, who when wounded in a battle by a poisoned sword, went to the place where the poison had been prepared and waskered Iseult's mother, whose name was also Iseult. Then he fell in love with Iseult there, didn't even know he was in love. 104. The meeting with the goddess. With her, the silly fellow. He goes back and tells his uncle Mark what a wonderful woman Hemet in Dublin. The baron say, well, Ides before the king married Solesin for Iseult. So he goes back to get Iseult with a lot of crazy adventures. Thena Iseult's mother prepared a love potions that the husband and wife would love each other. By chance, on the boat, the couple drinks the love potion and so they are in love, but this is a person-to-person love affair rather than a social situation. The whole tension of love versus marriage is developed there. Of course a theory were other problems. Where the insin? Now for immortal sin you have a grievous matter, sufficient reflection, and full consent of the will. If you drink a love potion there is no full consent of the will. A couple of the pets fixed it so the force of the potion would last only 2 or 3 years. By then, of course, they were in sin. From then on they had a mortal sin problem. That was something else. Then came the problem of resolving this tension between marriage and love. Amoris the proven call word for love. Amor. Spell it backwards and you get Roma. So marriage and love are a contrary. In those days of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Mary de Champagne and Blanche de Castile, and her daughters and so forth. Women had these affairs severe and we have the troubadours' reports of them. For example, some chap would come to the court with a case and say, I have offered myself to this lady and she said no, she already had a lover. She said so you would take me and she no longer had that lover. So it happened was that the woman got married to her lover after her husband died. Then number 2 presents himself and says, well, here I am. She says, oh, no, I love my husband. He says, that's impossible, that's a contradiction of terms. So Heber wrote the case to the court and the court decided that she had to accept him. The stories of the troubadours are just marvelous. Foe. 105. The Hero's Journey. Brown. Are you saying that most people have had a love experience like this? Campbell. I'm not gonna say everybody, but plenty of people have had this experience. It's not always that falling in love happens to coincide with the most prudent form of accident in your life. It's that continuity between the run of your life and the pull off that life, which the love allure suggests, that interests people in a story like Tristan and Iseult. The solution to the tension in the middle-aged scammy with Wolfram von Schönbach's Parzival. That was where love and marriage were brought together. It was an apple of a story. That's my favorite love story, Canard. Will you tell us about it, Campbell? It's a long story, my dear friends. This Grail romance of Wolfram von Eschenbach, his date was 1215 for this, was really the finishing of this great romance. Hefe said this problem, the tension between Amor and Roma. And that's us it stood in the Middle Ages. Love was a calamity to come into your life because the punishment for it was death. I mean, there was punishment by death for love. There's a wonderful scene in Gottfried von Strasberg's Tristan, after the couple has drunk the potion Brangian, the maid, who should have been watching the potion, not letting it loose like that into the sea, comes with shock and says to Tristan, you have drunk your death. And Tristan says, I don't know what you mean. This anguish was the great thing that the Middle Age was interested in, the pain of love, which is the pain of life. Your life is where your pain is, you might put it that way. And it was the experience of the anguish that felt the essence of life. So he said, if by death you mean the punishment that will be ours if we are discovered, I accept that. If by death you mean eternal death in the fires of hell, I accept that, too. That's a big potent statement, because those people did believe in hell. The only answer I can think of to that is the wonderful saying of Meister Eckhart that, love knows no pain. So that, even if your beloved is with you, it's gonna be okay. That was the climate that Wolfram faced when he was working on Parzival. The medieval overcoming of the marriage, love polarity that is represented in Tristan and Iseult was achieved, really, by Wolfgang von Eschenbach and his Parzival. 106. The meeting with the goddess. TBC. Campbell. Now the problem of the Grail romance is, what's known as the wasteland? What is the wasteland? You get a clue from T. S. Eliot in his poem, The Wasteland, 1922. The question is, how is one to turn the wasteland into a land of flowers, with everything coming up roses? The wasteland is a land of people who are living in authentic lives. They just get a job because they've got tea olive and that is rubbish. Where can life come out of this rubble? He's somewhere. The medieval situation was that people were required to profess beliefs they did not hold, to profess love for people whom they had married and had no love for. And they held positions that they had inherited and not earned, and saw as a context of inauthentic lives. This is what Wolfram's was the wasteland. Now how does that failed? It gets shielded through the example of an authentic life. Wolfram started the story with Parzival's father, Gomerey, a knight adventurer, who began to serve the Caliph of Baghdad. Christian knight serving a Muslim monarch. Wolfram jumped at the circle of the Christian tradition and recognized Islam as the sister religion of Christianity. So in the course of Gomerey's service to the Caliph, he came to a place called Zazaming that was governed by a black princess. Her name was Belcarne. He became her champion and lifted a siege and then became her husband. He begot a son, but before the boy was born he took what we used to call French leave. He went back to Wales and there was the queen whose name was Herzaloga.